Hello, citizens. If you want to get dangerous, then tune in to Dude, Remember This? A podcast from Stuck in the Heartland Productions with your hosts, Jake the Geek and Zeke the Audio Freak. It's where to go for your memories.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Dude, Remember This? We have a wonderful episode this time. We're extremely excited. We know a lot of you guys are too. We've talked with a few of you that have given us questions that we're probably not going to ask because we thought of better ones, so we probably won't go over those. But we just wanted to thank everybody for being a part of this, everything we've been doing so far. So far we have some awesome people that are part of this community. But we have something that was one of the main reasons why we wanted to start this podcast anyways, was that way we could reach out to people that help shape our warped little minds while we were growing up and the different things that we got into. And, you know, I was talking with Zach earlier, which Zach's with me. You can't see him in the camera, but he's actually here.
Oh, God.
Yeah, he's here with us. So he's going to be... He'll be focusing on the on all his audio and video, making sure everything's running. And I have the loud mouth. I'll be the one that'll be speaking throughout this episode. Hopefully, our guest will be speaking just as much as me, if not more, preferably more. You guys want to hear him, not me. But I was talking with Zach, and you know we were talking about when we were growing up. You had certain friends that you loved to go spend time at their house because their father was so cool. They just had great dads. And today we actually get to speak with one of the best dads. Darkwing Duck's dad is with us today. And we're just so excited to talk with Tad Stones. Tad, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
So
Not a problem.
I have to ask you a question before we get started with everything. I heard that you once had a conversation with George Lucas about how nobody would like the new Star Wars movies.
That is correct. Well, he said 1 to 3. I mean, basically, you know, you'd think I'd remember more of the conversation, but I was working at Imagineering, working on originally the Transportation Pavilion, then for a while the Space Pavilion, and then the Imagination Pavilion at the end. You'll notice there's no Space Pavilion at Epcot. Not my fault, but for a while Disney had an arrangement with George Lucas that basically he would lend his name as a project consultant for publicity purposes, and they would look at his plans for what is now Skywalker Ranch, because he's got a Victorian facade much like Main Street, and they knew all the stuff about drainage and things like that. So we spent the first half of the morning dealing with our project, and then we had lunch in just one of the conference rooms. Now, this was just a very small group. I was definitely the youngest person in the room. Everybody else was too cool for school as far as Star Wars was concerned. But I ended up sitting directly across from him, and I looked at him and said, "I'm sorry, my friends in animation would kill me if I don't ask you about Star Wars."
Right.
And this would have been, I'm pretty sure this was just before Empire. Might have been after Empire. I suppose I could look up the date from when Epcot opened. But anyway, the two things my big takeaway was, one, there were 9 films. He said the last 3 would be, of course, they're not following George's outline now, but the last 3 would be Luke as an Obi-Wan character, which we've basically seen. So he was going to go back and do 1 through 3 to let Mark Hamill age, and then he said nobody liked the first 3. He said it would be because they would be about political, machinations. Now, at the time, I thought, well, cool. Much like you look at Captain America: Winter Soldier, aside from the costumes, it's not what you would normally call a superhero movie. It's more like a suspense or a spy thriller. So it's like, yeah, if you're talking, I don't know, All the President's Men, or, there's all sorts of, quote, political movies you could make. So setting in a Star Wars universe actually would be kind of groundbreaking, be a whole new kind of film. Sure. So that was fine by me. I mean, in hindsight, it's just funny that he said that. And also, it's kind of like if you really think no one would like it, you are in charge of your universe. You can pick the story you want to tell. I mean, it's like saying, "Oh, I'm going to do a movie about World War II." A lot of stories there,
Yeah.
from two guys in a foxhole to here's the story of a battle. Anyway, that was as much it was. I mean, I kid about it because obviously there are many people who seem to hold the first three movies in, or I should say the prequel movies in
Right.
lower regard. But no, I mean, for a while he denied the whole nine movie thing. He was just saying there were six, but that's how it goes. So yes, I got to do a lot of crazy things when I was at Disney. I met, you know, Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury, and as far as Joe Haldeman, the science fiction writer, Hugo Award winner, and a book of his right there. I'm overdue reading. Um, so yeah, I mean, it was just, I mean, it was a very creative organization, both before and after the big change
Right.
that I lived through. So it was fantastic, and
That's
George was
awesome.
just a couple of days of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I've read up, of course, anytime you're going to do an interview, you should do a little bit of research. And look, you've had an amazing career, in my opinion. You've done some awesome stuff from every end of the spectrum. It seems like you've done some really great stuff in TV animation. I know you've done some animation itself, working in animation, and then you've transitioned into storytelling. And can you tell us a little bit about what that transition was like, going from you wanting to be an animator to more focusing on the writing side of things?
Well, yeah, I mean, I used to love the behind the scenes episodes of The Wonderful World of Disney, or before that, Disneyland. Um, I never thought in entering the company that I'd have a chance to go behind a lot of those scenes. Um, what happened basically, you at that time there was a training program, was literally just Eric Larson, one of the nine old men, and then you know guys in the room next to him that would you'd work on a personal test. So you're kind of learning animation as you're kind of doing a test of animation that's supposed to see whether you get to survive there. I
Right.
think each one you did two. I think each one was 8 weeks. To give a sense of timeline, I came in about, I want to say, Ron Clemens of Aladdin and Little Mermaid fame, and the new one Moana coming out. Ron came in, I think I want to say in February of '74. I came in June '74, and then Glenn Keane came in, I think, that August. So that's where I was situated. Um, anyway, once you survived that training program, you became an in-betweener, um, which I stunk at and almost lost my job over. Uh, and then you were supposed to do personal tests in your spare time. Um, I would start one and then have a better idea and create a new one, and do some of it and then have a better idea. Some way too ambitious, but it all came down to a day when Ed Hansen, the manager of the department, was walking by, and this is back when we had moviolas in our room, and I had one of my tests on a moviola, and I said, Ed, can you take a look at this? Do you think this is worth going back in and finishing? Um, and he said, wow, yeah, you don't have to finish it. We'll show it to the review board like that. And it's like, oh, cool,
Right.
because review board was a, a big chunk of the nine old men. You're not talking about amateurs here. Um, and then he said, yeah, we had given up on you.
Oh.
What? It's
Yeah.
like, they never heard of a 6-month review. Basically, because I kept doing tests, but I never showed them.
Mm.
So they just thought I lost interest, or, they were prepared that, yeah, some people, they're just going to be in-betweeners. Had that been the actual case, believe me, I would not have a career there. Um, anyway, I was actually made up, rose to assistant animator at that. But what I realized is I was more interested in figuring out what the characters are going to do than making them do it.
Okay.
And that's pretty much the definition of story. Wooly Reisman gave me a chance to work on story on Fox and Hound. The first thing was taking some existing animation. The story had changed drastically, and coming up with a sequence that would save that animation. And then I did like the hunter setting the traps for Todd with the dog Copper, which I was playing around with pastels with Mel Shaw, who is this master pastel guy. I did not get a credit in the movie. This is back when credits were, you know, they were very stingy with the credits, and it didn't bother me because I kind of expected it until they gave a credit to Squeaks, which was a worm that the birds chased. Squeaks, that's himself because he was a sound effect.
Right.
And I was like, really? I mean, a character that doesn't exist gets that little piece of, film time, and somebody who actually worked on it. So, whatever. At
That's
the
gotta
time,
make you. That's
working
gotta.
at Imagineering.
Yeah, that's gotta make you feel real rough to put all the time and energy.
The company was really strange at the time. It was the fact that when he originally told me that I wasn't going to get credit, I didn't blow up. It was like, you take this really well. I'm going to see about getting you credit. It's kind of this weird, okay, this is a test. Let's see if he's going to be a problem. Anyway, that was, after that, basically stayed in story. I did move over to, well, I mean, I was at Imagineering at the time. I came back to do some Epcot documentaries that, again, didn't happen. Helped out in television for about a year, just kind of on a consultant basis on some fantasy projects and Donald's 50th anniversary with Dick Van Dyke. And then went back to features and was developing a feature film of my own. And that's when Eisner and Katzenberg and those guys came in and the world changed. So that's basically how I got to story, was kind of discovering it myself. And then given opportunities, I moved over to Imagineering because Epcot was, frankly, I'm sure they didn't know what to do with me. The fact that I had done an educational film, they said, hey, wait, Epcot's kind of educational. Let's put them over there. Who knows I'm sure I was oblivious to how other people were looking at me at the time. But when I ended up in TV, it worked out okay.
I would definitely say it worked out okay. I think a little bit more than okay. I mean, I doing a little bit of research, I was noticing as I was going down and looking at different things you've done. You've had a hand in just about every one of my favorite cartoons growing up. So,
oh, cool.
I mean, I know one that you did a little bit with was Gummy Bears.
Yeah, that was Jim Magon and Art Vitello created the show.
Right.
In fact, that stemmed from Michael Eisner's first meeting, which was cool because I had done some work on coming up with some half-hour ideas for featurettes actually for Europe through the marketing licensing side. They knew me, and I got a call when I was on vacation saying, we know you're on vacation. We know it's going to be a Sunday, but would you mind coming to Michael Eisner's house on Sunday to talk about TV animation? It's like, I'm going to say no.
Right.
To meet the new guy. Anyway, it was in that, again, the two solid takeaways out of that, and Frank Wells showed up too, was that I showed some Mickey, science fiction Mickey project I had worked on that they liked a lot, but it was, no, Mickey's too precious. We don't want to start with Mickey. So he had respect for the culture, for what made Disney.
Sure.
But he's the one who said, my kids came back from camp and they had this German candy called Gummy Bears. All their friends are crazy about them. And it's weird to think there was a time when it wasn't like as pervasive, and it's like saying peppermints or something. Anything with that name would be a hit. And I remember standing in his parking lot outside his tennis courts. I said, we were kind of doing kind of, what do we think of the new guy? And it was like, he seemed really sharp. He said all the right things. Well, except for that Gummy Bears idea. It's like saying pepperoni people or something. Anyway, for a long time, Gummy Bears did get, I'm talking about all the, sorry, you will not have a hard time getting me to talk.
No, that's fine. That's good.
Gummy Bears was developed along the lines of Candyland or something. I think a villain was Licorice Whip or something like that. There was a time He-Man used to have morals at the end of their show
Yeah.
because everywhere they was too violence. They literally were talking about having the characters do dental hygiene messages at the end of every show. Until finally, they had to come up with something better. I don't know if they pitched some stuff and it didn't work or whatever. I wasn't at TV animation at the super start. I was in there the first year though. Anyway, they kind of looked at Asterix and Obelix and the cool characters those are, and the idea of a potion that gives super strength, and they created a mythology of gummy bears. I came in, they did 2 seasons on NBC, and it was a huge deal. Jim Magan got to story edit the show because he had no credits. I mean, he had worked on Walt Disney Records with Gary Kreisel, who was the head of the division, and he was kind of like the go-to guy for everything creative, and Gary brought him along to TV animation for much the same reason. So they had created the show, so of course they're going to let him story edit. From Disney's point of view, from networks, they're used to, calling, saying, oh no, you think you want that guy, but we actually want this guy. Anyway, he did it for 2 seasons. They wanted to change. They, picked me. I kind of rewrote the Bible a little bit to expand story possibilities, putting the kingdom at the middle of trade routes so we could bring in different characters and all that. And had a great time, in that season. Ended up being called co-producer. And I said, well, if I'd known I was co-producer, I would have given different notes. But it was a lot of fun. It was a great thing. And then later on, Rich Fogel and Mark Seidenberg took it over writing-wise to fill it out, to do 65 episodes in all. So anyway, that's my Gummy Bears involvement.
Yeah,
it was just that little third season right there in the center.
Yeah, but I mean, you had a pretty big part in an awesome cartoon growing up. I know a lot of people who just I loved it. From there though, where did you go from? Is that whenever you started working on DuckTales directly after that, or?
Well, yeah, Jim and I had key positions. I mean, actually, when I first came to TV animation, I was technically an executive manager of creative affairs until Gummy Bears. And then Jim and I kind of switched back and forth. One would be giving notes while the other did a show. And so Jim would have been, well, he was on DuckTales. Anyway, they need an executive give notes. I did that for a while. I forget what I would have been pulled off for. I wasn't like the only executive doing it, but I gave a lot of the notes early on. And the story editors were Jim Magon, who was very much Carl Barks oriented and adventure, which side I preferred, and Ted Anasty and Patsy Cameron, who had come from the Smurfs, which was the #1 show at the time. And they brought some of the sillier elements. I think one of the first things they proposed was the Lobster Mobster or something. But I think a lot of the new characters came from them, and I have to say it's probably the mix of the silliness they brought to it, the renaming of the Beagle Boys, and the adventures that Jim did. I think he did all the, I want to say all the multi-part stories were his. And I think that made DuckTales, which was a huge hit.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and then, so after DuckTales, gee, you know what? I'm trying to figure out what was I doing back then. I guess there's things like Fluffy Dogs and stuff like that in the middle too. In any case, after that, Jim and I developed Rescue Rangers together. But then when it got time to start, they said, we can't have you both on a project. I mean, again, we were considered key guys. So Jim gave notes, and I worked on the show.
So, I mean, what was that like? There's so many great characters in Chippendale. I mean, you have great villains, and it seems like with you are really good at developing. If it's always you working on it, I don't know, But the villains that were in the cartoons that you worked on were fantastic. I mean, that was a lot of times that made up a lot of the show. So I mean,
Well, we
where did
always,
these characters come from?
I mean, we always wanted to twist. Some was half-remembered Silver Age stuff, which really came out in Darkwing. Fat Cat, as a matter of fact, though, way back when we were looking for things to develop in the series, one of the obvious ones from features was The Rescuers, because Rescuers was a series of books. And Jeffrey said, no, we're doing a Rescuers 2. And he said, and which was unheard of at the time to do a sequel. But he says, no, things like that are more surefire things. They help pay for the experiments. And Rescuers 2 was a huge hit around, more, I think, internationally than domestic. But anyway, so we couldn't touch that. And then we were pitching random ideas, and a lot of times Jeffrey would key, and Michael would key in on a title. And we pitched Metro Mice after Miami Vice at the time. And they just loved the name. They said, let's develop that. So Carl Gears, who was, the heart of Winnie the Pooh when that came on TV, he and I wrote a script together for Metro Mice, which had Fat Cat as the villain. That pitch didn't go anywhere, or whatever we were doing the script for, whatever did not fly. But the whole team, rodent team, kind of was still there. And when we did start Rescue Rangers, it's like, well, here's Fat Cat. We have Jim Cummings doing the voice. Let's, he seems like a natural for our guys. I got to say, most of Rescue Rangers was by the seat of our pants, because the only story editors on it were myself and Bryce Malik, and we had 3 teams of production people to keep busy. Normally, and again, Disney was really new, so it's kind of like, I guess this is how we do it. Normally, we should have had at least one story editor more than you have units, so that if you have 3 units, you should have at least 4 story editors, and each of those editors works with a group of writers, and that way you're sure scripts are coming through and with a degree of quality to them. So, that was the working 7 days a week period of my life, where Saturday I only worked 8 hours, and Sunday, my day off, I only worked 4. And that meant not working from home. That was going into the studio. And Jim was giving notes, and it was one of those things where I was doing Rescue Rangers differently than Jim would have done them, much like Jim was different from Ted and Patsy. And that mix made DuckTales. The difference here is he was the executive giving me notes, and I'm doing it a different way, and yet I couldn't slow down because of how to feed the shows, and that just made things all the tougher. In fact, I was taken off the show for the last, I want to say 15 or so episodes, and I nearly quit Disney, actually, at that point. And what kept me there was, let's see if it's not glued down. I always wanted one of these. Which you got for, 15 years of service. And like that June, and I swear one of the things that kept me going was just 2 more months and I can get the statues up.
Well, we're grateful for that, because if you would have left then, we never would have got the duck that helped us, form our childhood, Darkwing Duck, which, let's talk a little bit about that. I know Jim Cummings, he was a huge part of making that show. The atmosphere that it had was, the voice and everything.
Oh, definitely. But you got to realize, backing up, Rescue Rangers, a lot of those episodes we did with 4 people, because at least 3 of the 4 had a million voices in them. And
yeah,
Corey Burton was Dale, and Tress McNeil was Chip and Gadget. And again, these guys are master voice people. Jim came aboard as Fat Cat, but did kind of by default did most of the villains early on. At the beginning, Peter Cullen, the voice of Optimus Prime, was actually Monterey Jack, and then I felt like he was hitting the voice when we cast the thing. Those 2 guys were like neck and neck, and it was just somebody said, well, I kind of like the register of that guy's voice better, meaning Peter Cullen's. But when we got into it, I just felt he was missing some of the humor we were putting into Monterey Jack. I mean, his performance was great and his accent was great. It was just, you're looking for someone who's digging the most out of the material, and Jim was certainly doing that with the guest stars. So he moved. So there's actually 2 Monterey Jacks in the series. So anyway, I knew how versatile Jim would be. But again, he auditioned with everybody else. But it was that unique voice that really, did a lot in his ad libs. Of course, all those guys are genius at ad libbing, but Jim seemed to hit the mark. And Ginny McSwain was our voice director. And there's very few times you hear about voice directors outside of Andrea Romano at Warner Brothers, because they kind of made her part of their publicity on every project, and Disney was never oriented that way. But Ginny did a huge job of feeding, and was a great director in general, but specifically in Darkwing, I saw her feed things back to Jim. She said, remember that sound? Remember the tone of voice you did when that happened? Use that here. And then Jim would process that, and things that he had just come up on the spur of the moment becomes part of the ongoing character. So it was great seeing that happen. And of course, as soon as you hear the voices, now the characters become more real, and you write toward things that you hear and all that. So that was just, that was one of my 2, top shows I've ever done. It was just a lot of fun. Again, so much fun with the Silver Age, which my audience didn't know anything about, but it was the time when Jimmy Olsen would turn into a giant turtle, or Elastic Lad, or Lois Lane's head would grow huge because she was super evolved. All that stuff. I used to tell my writers, my story editors, to pitch me the comic book cover, much like the Julius Schwartz era of DC Comics. It was like, get a crazy cover that makes it an intriguing visual at the core of your show. And it seemed to work. I also told the guys, as much as what sold that show was, and kept it from being a parody, it needed Disney heart. And what sold it was the idea that, or the question, what if Batman had a little girl who refused to stay at home? And that was Goslin. And right. that made the show. And it kept it different from, other superhero parodies or things like that. These were real characters having their lives, albeit in a silly universe.
Yeah, and so many of the episodes stick out, of course, and I know you get that all the time, and I would bet, if I had to put money down, most people say that their favorite episode was Twin Peaks.
It gets mentioned a lot, and I used to think that a story editor I always tried to use was Kevin Hops, who came on Rescue Rangers. It's just Kevin and I were in sync, so I always counted on him. Kevin told me once, he says, people are saying, you're going to lunch with Tad, but you guys are always yelling at each other. And it was like, what? And it's like, no, we were just hashing out stories and things like that. Anyway, he pointed out, I thought Kevin had written that episode. And he said, no, you wrote it. And I realized it had started with Jan Stranad, who's both a comic writer and animation writer. Everybody liked Twin Peaks. And I said, look, our audience doesn't watch Twin Peaks, so it can be Twin Peaks, but someone who knows nothing about the show has to be able to, enjoy it as a Darkwing Duck episode. And Jan took his shot at it, but it was just too many random references that, again, if you're a fan of the show, you'd probably laugh at, but they didn't really, it was too non sequitur. So I took it over because I said, I can't give this to somebody else, and it's never going to happen, because evidently I'm looking for a balance that only I know what I'm looking for. But what it did is gave that episode such a weird tone, and I knew it was successful because, again, Kevin was not watching Twin Peaks, and he saw it, and he said, that's great. I mean, he just read it in the script. He says, this is great. It's so different from anything else. We really wanted to pick other TV shows and kind of play with the same idea. Mm-hmm. And, the fact of the matter is you have to go with the stories that are being pitched. And we never found another show that that fit it that much.
Yeah, what I really liked about it, now as a father and watching it with my children, and watching those kind of things with your kids. Nowadays, cartoons a lot of times will try to put it together to where the adults in the room get humor too, and they like it too. So the kids and the adults are watching it. But back then, there wasn't a whole lot of cartoons that were doing that, that I know of, and it seemed like that. My mom, somebody who would like Twin Peaks, because it was more of a soap opera-ish type of show, and my mom, who would watch it, could sit down and watch Darkwing Duck with me and enjoy it because there were so many things that she was getting, and it was such a dark humor in some areas, I mean, the fact that it starts off with, Bushroot being dead, and wrapped in plastic. It's like, when you're a kid and you see that, you don't see that all the time on TV, and it's like, oh, whoa, wait a second, what's going on? And it did have such a cool feel to it that, even now, somebody who would watch it could get so much from it. You guys did fantastic with that. It's obviously it still sticks out in mind. So,
well, I mean, a lot of the villains were just, it's kind of like, don't fall into the cliches. Try to make them entertaining in their own way. I like the episodes with the alien hats. That the idea of mind control is, an old cliche, but having aliens that look like hats that sat on your head and got into your brain was a lot of fun. But I especially liked it when they look at Darkwing's hat and they go, "Ew, a husk." It's like eating a hollowed out body. It's like,
right.
Oh, these monsters. Yeah, I mean, again, some of my favorite episodes are ones that really played with medium, like Splatter Phoenix when she goes in and out of paintings and drags Launchpad and Darkwing with them. Comic Book Capers is an episode that is Darkwing's upset at how they're writing Darkwing stories, and he takes over the story, and then that becomes the adventure you're watching, and then the pages blow out the window, and Megavolt finds him, and he starts rewriting, and somebody sets a coffee cup down on a page of the comic, and suddenly they're running into a giant coffee cup in the middle of the adventure. So to me, those are the things that are entertaining to everybody, because you make sure it's entertaining for the young viewers, but we were looking for original and fresh gags.
Yeah, you nailed it.
So it was a lot of fun. Actually, my first script was That Sinking Feeling, which was the villain Moriarty was trying to affect the orbit of the moon, keep the Earth in darkness so he could come from underground. And in the third act of that, they're in a baseball stadium, but without explanation, suddenly the whole cast is in baseball uniforms, much like the old Warner Brothers cartoons, and in baseball uniforms catching him in a pickle as they go back and forth. And that is something I'm not sure we ever returned to, the idea to go that far out, with the old short subject tropes. But we came close, and we did it in different ways. So.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think that, a lot of the stuff growing up that I loved, your name keeps coming up in it, and Darkwing Duck was definitely something that, I mean, even in high school, me and my friends would be like, oh man, what do you guys think about Darkwing? And we'd still talk about it. We didn't care that people thought we were dorks. We'd still talk about it, and obviously I'm a 30-year-old man still talking to you about Darkwing Duck. So
it was great. I just I went to a convention in Atlanta, Georgia, MomoCon. And it was the first time a convention had actually invited me to be an official guest. So they gave me a table. I didn't have anything to sell. I wasn't charging for my autograph. So I just did a lot of original art to sell. And it was great interacting with the fans, and how many fans came by and just said, wow, much like you said, thanks for making my childhood, or you were such a huge part. And one woman said she lost a bet, and she had to sing the entire theme song of Chippendale's Rescue Rangers, and it was awesome. She had a great voice. And there's a little bit of video on the net, and while she's singing, in the background you can see a cosplayer as Gadget, and then Jim Cummings walks up in the middle of it and starts singing with her. So
awesome.
It's like it's the craziness that happened. That was
Yeah.
just fantastic. And she was saying, I had 5 kids and we loved your shows, Chippendale and Darkwing. Um, so again, but Darkwing is definitely the favorite. Darkwing was zeroing in on my taste
Yeah.
in a big way.
Well, and that has to mean something for you because the one that you didn't have as much influence from the outside is the one that you're probably remembered for the most, and the one that you probably have the most fan base for, I would assume. And that came from you, so kudos.
Yeah,
Good job.
actually, it's interesting when you say how big the fan base is because I have no clue. For years and years, I heard was Rescue Rangers, um, and then certainly Darkwing. But then recently, um, actually, well, like last Christmas, I went to Sedona, Arizona, and I had on an old crew jacket for Hercules, the TV show
Yeah.
Hercules that we did at Disney, and the waitress in Sedona, Arizona said, "Oh my God, did you work on Hercules?" I said, because I assume they're talking Kevin Sorbo. So I said, "No, this is Disney's animated one." She goes, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And I realized, and then it happened again at an In-N-Out Burger down the street. Uh, and I realized there's kind of a window of fans as they aged into the Disney afternoon,
Yep.
and now they're,
Yeah.
out there in the world. Um, that it's that soon no one will be talking about the chipmunks and the ducks. They'll be talking about Aladdin and Hercules and Buzz Lightyear.
It's
Uh, yeah, actually James Silvani, who is the artist of the new Darkwing Duck comic book, issue 1 and 2 on the stands right now.
absolutely.
James said, "Why don't you?" Because I'm doing all this original artwork and it's all Rescue Rangers and Darkwing. He said, "Why don't you draw Aladdin?" I said, "Well, 2 reasons. One, those are creations of my friend Ron Clemens and John Musker and their crew. They don't feel like my
Sure.
people. And secondly, they're really hard to draw. Why would I do that?" And I feel the same way for all my shows. I mean, my second favorite show of my career is Hellboy Animated.
Mhm.
And even though we drastically changed the design, which is part of the deal, um, that Mike Mignola was very happy about, frankly, that we changed things. It's still his creation, even though it's my version of it, like Guillermo del Toro did his version of it. It's not the same as characters. Yeah, no, I didn't create Chip and Dale, but in those little costumes, those were our guys in
Exactly.
that team. So
Well, they didn't have a
it's just fun
personality.
hearing sense. Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't have a personality or anything before, really. It was just every now and then they'd pop in. I mean, you gave them their personality and their life and the way that we know them now.
Yeah,
So yeah,
kind of extrapolated what was there.
yeah,
There was definitely one who had a bigger nose, and he seemed a little goofier, so we took it from there.
yeah. So kind of going back a little bit, once you were done with Darkwing Duck, is that whenever you started working on the Aladdin sequels, or were you still staying with the television?
Yeah, it was no, actually right after Darkwing Duck, I thought, great, I've done my superhero show. Now I'll do my science fiction show,
Hmm.
and I did like 36 color cards myself while there was a whole team working on gargoyle presentations. Um, but it didn't click with the boss, and in fact it was weird. It was like a lot of the other executives liked it, within TV animation, liked it a lot, but it was almost like you're looking at a black piece of paper and he goes, "We need to make this darker." Well, it's black. It was like that, just disconnect, just
Yeah.
didn't see the show. And then later they actually used my artwork to just pitch kind of a version of the Jetsons that Eisner and Katzenberg basically said, "This is just the Jetsons." And
Yeah.
it's like, "Oh, really? You use my artwork?" And I said, "I did all that on my own time, even though Disney make a case that they own everything." Um, it's like now you've kind of blown it. I can't reinvent my show and pitch it again. Um, anyway, I was all set for that, and then he invited me to a lunch, and I'm going, "Oh, maybe we're going to talk about your show," and instead it was like, "We want you to do Aladdin." And from then on, it was all feature spin-offs. And I had to talk to Ron and John because I was like, "Guys, they want me to do this." And, they were company guys. They said, "Yeah, of course, go ahead." And my favorite episodes of that were the big adventures, the things that were closest to Arabian Nights, and I mean, my collection of story editors just became better and better and better through the years, that I worked with.